The radar technician at the Bavar 373 battery outside trees had been watching a clean screen for 3 hours. Standard night rotation, empty sky. Then, at 2:31 local time, something blinked. There for half a second, gone, then back again. 40 kilometers deeper inside Iranian airspace than anything should have been. Not interference, not a phantom signal, something real. Something that had been moving silently through Iranian sovereign airspace for nearly 40 minutes before his system caught the faintest trace of it. He reached for the phone. The mission had started hours earlier at Nevatim Air Base in southern Israel, where a small group of F-22 Raptors had been quietly forward positioned in the weeks prior. The official Pentagon language was what it always is: rotational presence, regional interoperability. Words designed to say as little as possible about something that communicates everything. You do not send F-22 Raptors, America's most advanced air superiority fighter, never shared with a single ally in the aircraft's entire history, to the Middle East for routine anything. The actual objective was deep signals intelligence. Iran's air defense network had been evolving at a pace that troubled American analysts. The Bavar 373 long-range system, woven into a layered architecture, command nodes buried deep inland, emission patterns that satellites could not fully decode from orbit. The F-22's sensor fusion suite and electronic warfare systems could go where satellites couldn't. They could slip through gaps in border radar coverage, push into the electromagnetic core of Iran's air defense network, and record everything. Every frequency, every pulse interval, every data link signature that the system broadcast into the night without realizing anyone was listening. For 40 minutes, no one knew. The two Raptors flew deep, silent, invisible to every conventional radar that swept across them. They crossed mountain ranges, avoided known radar installations, and flew at altitudes optimized not for speed, but for electronic collection. Patient, methodical, gathering intelligence that would reshape American understanding of Iranian air defenses for years. The crews communicated in short, encrypted bursts. The night was perfect. The mission was unfolding exactly as intended. Then, the Bavar 373's passive detection network, a multi-node, low-emission architecture that Iran had been quietly building specifically to address the stealth problem, caught a fragmentary return. Not enough for a weapons-quality track, barely enough to confirm something was there, but enough. The scramble order went out at 0243. At Tabriz Air Base, 2 Iranian Air Force F-14 Tomcats rolled out of hardened shelters. The crews had been sitting alert. This positioning was deliberate. Iran had been expecting exactly this kind of intrusion and had placed its longest-range interceptors to respond. The F-14 is aged by any modern standard. A design born in 1970, kept alive by Iranian engineers working with improvised components and 4 decades of enforced isolation. But it carries the AWG-9, still one of the most powerful mechanically scanned arrays ever installed in a fighter aircraft. And it carries the Facture 90, Iran's reverse-engineered, rebuilt, long-range air-to-air missile, with a reach that demands respect regardless of the platform launching it. The tasking was not a routine intercept. The crews were not told to escort the intruders out. They were directed to get between the Raptors and the exit, block egress, cut off escape, force a confrontation in Iranian airspace on Iranian terms. Tehran was sending a message in the only language that cannot be misread. 2 fighters with weapons armed, telling the United States Air Force that the era of uncontested penetration was finished. The F-14s lit their afterburners and climbed hard into the dark. Inside the Raptors, the ALR-94 electronic warfare system had already built a complete picture. The moment the F-14 activated on the ground, their radar emissions were captured, cataloged, and tracked. By the time the Tomcats reached cruise altitude, the Raptor pilots already had targeting solutions on both Iranian aircraft. That is the core asymmetry of this engagement. The F-22 does not merely see first. It sees first by a margin so wide that the geometry of the fight is effectively settled before the opponent fully understands they are in one. The Tomcat crews were pushing their throttles forward and scanning their scopes, searching. They did not know they were already the targets, but the Raptor pilots were operating under strict rules of engagement. No offensive action unless fired upon.
So they observed, maneuvered, and began moving toward the border, drawing the Tomcats forward while time worked against them. The AWG-9 swept hard. The radar returns from the Raptors were disorienting, appearing and disappearing, never stable, never lockable.
A contact that behaved like nothing either crew had ever trained against. They were chasing something that refused to be properly chased, guided more by bearing and instinct than by any reliable track. The closer they got, the more the Raptors seemed to dissolve, shifting sideways on the scope, refusing to hold still long enough for a clean solution. It was like trying to hold smoke in your hands. Yet the Iranian pilots pressed forward. Training, orders, pride, some mix of all three kept them climbing and closing, despite what their instruments were telling them. They had launched from Tabriz with a mission, and that mission had not changed. Every kilometer closed was another kilometer the Raptors could not use to reach the border. Even without a clean lock, proximity had value. Get close enough, fire enough, and probability does the rest. That was the logic. At approximately 65 nautical miles, one of the Iranian pilots made his decision. The solution was imperfect. It did not matter. 2 Facur 90 missiles came off the rails, engines igniting, racing northeast through the dark. 11 seconds. That is roughly how long the electronic engagement lasted. The F-22's systems had spent the entire intercept building a precise library of the Facur 90's active radar homing frequencies. The moment the missiles went active in their terminal phase, the Raptors responded. Not with a broad jamming sweep, but with surgical, precisely calibrated interference at the exact frequencies the seekers needed to function. Simultaneously, timed chaff packages burst into the sky, blooming into false returns that the guidance systems could not separate from real targets. The missiles turned, chased the decoys. One detonated on a chaff cloud, its proximity fuse convinced it had found its mark. The other lost guidance entirely and fell through 10,000 feet of empty Iranian night before hitting nothing. The Raptors were already crossing the border, and then the tone in the Iranian pilots' headsets changed. New radar contacts, multiple, from the west. High, fast, and closing with an energy signature that belongs to nothing offensive. The F-35Cs had been airborne for over an hour, running a silent combat air patrol far out over the eastern Mediterranean, launched from the USS Gerald R. Ford the moment the intelligence mission began. When the missile launches were detected, they went to full military power and turned east. They covered the distance in minutes. What the F-14 crews saw on their scopes was not reassuring. The F-35 contacts were intermittent, flickering, the same frustrating, low observable signature they had just spent 20 minutes failing to lock onto with the Raptors, now approaching from the opposite direction and closing fast. Their radar warning receivers were screaming with targeting emissions they could not pinpoint. They were being tracked by systems they could not see, from angles they could not fully determine, by aircraft that held every advantage of position and energy. The Facur 90 rails were empty. The AWG-9 was sweeping furiously and finding fragments. And somewhere behind those 2 F-35 contacts, invisible in the electronic noise, the Ford's entire air wing was spinning up. The F-35 pilots were not transmitting threats. They were not issuing warnings over open frequencies. They did not need to. Their approach geometry said everything. 2 low observable fighters converging on the F-14s from the west at closing speeds that left almost no decision time, each carrying a full complement of AIM-120 and AIM-9X missiles. Each with a targeting solution the F-14 crews could sense in their radar warning receivers without being able to locate or counter. The message was delivered not in words, but in physics. Get out, or find out what happens next. The tactical situation facing the F-14 crews collapsed with brutal speed. Ahead of them, the Raptors were already across the border and pulling away, uncatchable. Behind them, 2 F-35s were closing fast. Low observable fighters with weapons ready and nothing to negotiate. The missile load was spent. The fuel margin was tightening. The math was merciless. The Tomcat pilots broke south and ran for Tabriz.
The F-35s did not cross the border in pursuit. They did not need to. They throttled back, held position, and watched the Iranian fighters shrink on their sensors until the returns faded toward the base. The escort was complete. The message was delivered without a single additional weapon being fired, which is perhaps the coldest way a message can be delivered in aerial warfare. We could have, and we chose not to, and you know it.